Good day, everyone, and welcome to our presentation of the Paso Robles American Viticultural Areas. My name is Joe Spellman, Master Sommelier with Justin Vineyards, and a longtime fan of Paso Robles. Honored to be with you and going through some beautiful sites and some fantastic vineyards in Paso Robles, courtesy of the Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance and its sponsoring wineries. We have a number of different regions to talk about: soils, weather, grape varieties, and eventually wines. So let's start our exploration. We're going to go courtesy of Google Earth to the coast of California, the Central Coast comprised of Monterey, San Luis Obispo, and Santa Barbara counties primarily, the three largest counties, and hone in to the Paso Robles district in the northern end of San Luis Obispo County. Coastal towns, very cool, very difficult to grow grapes anywhere near there, but in the interior, over the Santa Lucia mountain range, we find many great sites in which vineyards have thrived for many decades. First, we're going to fly in and over Highway 46, which heads out to the ocean from the center of Paso Robles at Willow Creek. You can see here all the famous live oak trees that dot the landscape and are the reason Paso Robles is named so. These conical hills at Denner and the James Berry Vineyard, a very famous site, over some more trees. And we're staying out west in Paso Robles, moving up to the Adelaide district, and some beautiful vineyards as we get there for the famous Tablas Creek and Halter Ranch properties as we head west. Hope this is not too dizzying, but quite a bit farther north and west from the Willow Creek and Templeton areas where we were. And pulling back away, you can see the mountains that border the Adelaide district, that Santa Lucia range, at the heights of which no grapes are grown. Now we're going back east across the broad expanse of the region to the city of Paso Robles, bisected by the Salinas River and its trees surrounding the river. A lot of it is dry during the growing season, but the town's grown quite a bit over the last couple decades. Now we're heading southeast to the El Pomar district. Some great vineyards here, some fantastic settings for fine vineyards for many of the grower producers. And now finally getting out east to the Shalom Hills in the northeast corner of Paso Robles, and some pretty forbidding mountains behind that. Then we come back swinging out and up and take the view to the west from the eastern edge of Paso Robles across that wide expanse of about 40-50 miles to the Pacific Ocean. Now going back south again, and we lower our sights, come to the southern point of the Paso Robles AVA overall, which is the Santa Margarita Ranch area. And again, beautiful development of fantastic vineyards here, protected by the Santa Lucia range with equal access to ocean breezes, moisture, and wind patterns. And we come back and reside back over the Santa Lucias. Hope you've enjoyed the ride. Really fantastic way to see the wine region, at least the surface of it. And of course, that's all located in the northern third of San Luis Obispo County, about halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles, about 200 miles from either very large city there. So it's a little harder to get to than some of the North Coast or areas even in the South Coast for the big metropolitan areas, but well worth the ride. And we certainly encourage any professional or wine lover to visit Paso Robles anytime because of the breadth of exciting wineries and culinary delights to be found. So, what makes Paso great for grapes? Well, geographic distinctions as seen here in this hearted vineyard, this heart of old oak trees in the middle of Niner on a hillside in South Paso. to the west. The western border is at the least 6 miles from the Pacific Ocean. And of course, that varies depending on how far up in a hillside you are as a grower. But the landscape is quite diverse. There are many old river beds that have dried up that create interesting soil patterns and used to create more water patterns than they do now. There are some relatively flat parts of Paso Robles, but generally it rolls quite a bit. And of course, mountains define either end, east and west, of the Paso Robles AVA in a broad sense. The Santa Lucias to the west, parallel to the Pacific coast, and the La Panza and Shalom Hills in the east. And these tend to create a border around which there are very little vineyard activity. So the region's large. It's one of the largest AVAs ever established in California, 42 miles wide east to west and about 30 miles deep north to south at its deepest point. So Paso Robles, what does it mean? It's the Pass of the Oaks, El Paso de Robles, so named in the 18th century. The biggest region for the most diverse soils of all AVAs in California at over 600,000 acres. 40,000 different vineyard acres scattered all over these 11 sub-AVAs, over 200 wineries, and that's not even counting some of the virtual or second label wineries as separate wineries, and 64 different varieties known to be grown by all of these grower producers throughout the region. One great advantage Paso Robles has is one of the broadest diurnal temperature shifts from day to night in California. And because we're close to the ocean, as well as have broad expanses of undulating soil all the way through east to west, there are big differences between day and night, and that is very helpful to the vines. One other important factor, there is more calcareous and siliceous soil in Paso Robles than pretty much any other part of vineyard land in California. And this presents great advantages in an area where there's a dearth of volcanic soils or alluvial soils, which are found much more commonly in the North Coast. So Paso Robles, as an AVA, or American Viticultural Area, was established back in 1983. Only 17 operating wineries who got together to propose the region. It was approved by what was then the BATF, now known as the TTB, the Tax and Trade Bureau, that controls all of the naming of delimited wine places in California and the rest of the states in the Union. In 2007, a number of growers and producers felt that Paso Robles was almost too large an AVA, and it was a good idea to think about dividing it into distinct geographical subzones, much as Napa and Sonoma counties have done, and other parts of wine production country in California. Over many, many meetings and discussions, the proposal came down to approving 11 sub-AVAs within Paso Robles, all of which, importantly, are permitted to be identified as Paso Robles wines in a general sense, so that conjunctive labeling law is quite valuable to many growers and producers, particularly if they're crossing over from subregion to subregion. So these 11 subregions are distinctive for their weather patterns, for their soil types, and for the historic practices of grape growing in the regions and the style of wine they produce. And here they are in the almost rectangular map of Paso Robles. Not every part of Paso Robles is delimited by a sub-AVA, but the most important vineyards are included in one or the other of these 11. From the Adelaida district out west to the Highlands district way out to the east, and north to south, the large and productive Estrella district, some of the most traditional and old plantings in the region, all the way down to relatively newly developed Santa Margarita Ranch district, and so many in between. Cooler climates to the west, a little more rainfall and water absorption in the west. That includes Adelaida, Willow Creek, Templeton Gap, and to some extent, even parts of El Pomar. But as you are in the north and the east, far lower rainfall patterns, far different soil types, and generally a different kind of agriculture for grapes. Major roads, Highway 46, goes across the south end of the Paso Robles key districts and heads out east past Shandon and ends up toward Fresno. And north to south, the major highway is Highway 101, coming down from Monterey through San Miguel district and going down through the pass in the hills just to the west of the Santa Margarita district. So, in the west, Santa Lucia mountain range, very important because, as you can see in this photograph, that fog bank that can regularly come in over the mountains because of the orographic lift, that is, the classic patterns coming off the ocean, particularly in the afternoon and evening, of bringing moisture up the hill, all that moisture being absorbed by the mountain range, but creating wonderful breezes coming down off the mountains, makes it a very different growing area from what we see in the center and east of Paso Robles, and capable of doing many great wines as well. So this is overlooking Justin Vineyards and some of the hills there. You can see much of it surrounded by the live oaks, and in the background, the Santa Lucia range, which dominates. Now the eastern ranges, a little bit lower lying, a little more rolling, a lot more clay soils here, but also quite an interesting combination of other mineral and old calcareous bases can be found through here, dotting with trees as well here, but a lot more large properties, much more rolling vineyards, usually higher yielding and quite abundant in certain spots. Now to climate. Paso, of course, is known as a pretty warm place, but I want to prove to you it's cooler than you think. By the measurements that we take, we find Paso to be just a little bit warmer than Napa Valley over the course of most growing years. And one of the great advantages is this huge difference of temperature day to night. We might hit 100 or 105 degrees on certain warm days in July, August, but we do get cool overnight, anywhere from 45 to 60 degrees, allowing the vines to rest and repair and then be ready for another day of warmth. So that large diurnal shift, 40 to 45, even 50 degrees at certain times of the year, is highly valued for great viticulture. Likewise, rainfall, which is generally low, but is greater in the west, and because we have these regular patterns of fog and mist coming from the Pacific Ocean, there's a little more absorption of water before and after and during the growing season because of the rain shadow created by the orographic lift of the water and wind coming from the ocean in the mountains. So the wide diurnal temperature shift, the changes of temperature as you go from east to west or west to east, north to south, give us a lot more range of times of harvest and types of grape varieties. So here we're going to show you the Winkler scale and how it is measured in these many sub-AVAs or AVAs on their own right, where it's quite cool to the west, influenced highly by the winds coming off the ocean in the Templeton Gap from Morro Bay, south of Highway 46, but directly into the Templeton Gap and in and around Willow Creek and Adelaida. These are also influenced to some extent by winds that come from the north across the San Miguel district, and the east side a little less wind affected. But here certainly there is an opportunity for cooler temperatures at night and slower accumulation of heat during the early morning parts of the day in Adelaida, Willow Creek, Templeton, where it's region 2 or 3. This is analogous to Bordeaux or to Washington State, possibly to the Rhone Valley or Rioja. So those kind of grapes are the ones that thrive in Western Paso and have done well historically. A huge mix of Bordeaux and Rhone varieties have done very well. As we move east, again, a little more traditional Zinfandel historically, and a lot of that's given way to large masses of Bordeaux fruit and a lot of growers experimenting with many other varieties. And it's a little bit warmer, regions 3 and 4, particularly to the north in Estrella and San Miguel, and then all the way out into the far east in the shadow of the Cholam Hills in San Juan, Highlands, and Creston. Quite a bit warmer, more analogous to, say, Barossa Valley or St. Helena. And in Napa Valley, of course, a whole different set of constructs as far as soil heat summation, and so forth. But we're pretty close. And again, the Cuesta grade is also a defining factor for the Santa Margarita Ranch down in the south. So here's another view of some of these winds I started to talk about. The northwesterly winds coming off the ocean every day, down south through the Santa Lucias in the northern county of Monterey, along the Salinas River, and then downslope winds coming from the east, again, just created by that shift of the natural tendency of accumulating air to rise up over those hillsides in the Cholam Hills and the Panza Range. Temperatures do vary quite a bit between Paso, Robles, Napa, and Bordeaux, and generally, though, are consistent, especially in California. The growing years are quite parallel, with Paso being just a little bit warmer than Napa, maybe 1.5 degrees or maybe a little bit more on average per year. Typically, we will be parallel to the Napa patterns because, again, coastal California is all affected by that same big ocean. But Bordeaux, a little more erratic and a little bit lower overall in temperature, with typically a lot more rainfall, too. So Bordeaux has always struggled to ripen Cabernet and its related varieties in a consistent way, the way Napa and Paso have been able to do. And there have been dips, a couple of years that were quite a bit cooler in the early 2010s, 10 and 11, but generally we've been on a warm streak since then and have had really successful vintages. And again, rainfall, another factor that we like to look at besides temperature range. So rain here in the west is far more prevalent. And again, this is generally over the winter season rains. Once in a while, there'd be a mid-season rain, quite rare. And it tends to dry out as we go east. So there's a lot more development of water underground in our calcareous soils in Adelaida and Willow Creek and Templeton Gap, higher elevation, much more rugged country, holding that water than far out east where only 11 to 15 inches are accumulating on average over most growing year winters. And again, that doesn't mean you can't grow good grapes out there. It just means that all has to be irrigated. But generally, most vineyards are, save for a few old traditional Zinfandel and a few Grenache vineyards. So here's another graph that shows the temperature, again, overlaid with the water absorption or the water falling throughout Paso Robles, and that has been erratic in Paso too. Typically in coastal California, we'll go through 3, 4, maybe even 5 years of drier wet rainfall accumulation, and then boom, we get a year that's very wet. So 2006 was that way, 2011 was that way, and then several years of dry temperatures. We've had an actually pretty good couple of years recently. 2016 to 17 really was beneficial with a lot more rainfall than we had seen for 5-6 years. Therefore, better crops. And anyway, I'm grateful to Jim Jerakaris, my colleague at Justin, for helping with those graphs. Soil types. Now, we have a wide range in Paso Robles of different soils, multiple soils that some of which are not found in the North Coast too much. And then again, we don't have that much of what a lot of the North Coast is made out of, which is volcanic soils. We have some. But generally, this is old sedimentary soils pushed up by tectonic plate movement, the Pacific Ocean plate hitting the North American plate, causing all sorts of soil fracturing and interlaying. And so our core soil that we think is very valuable for grape growing is the calcareous or carbonate-rich soils. These are often intermingled with these other types, sandy loam, clay, and silica soils, but the calcareous soils really benefit us because of the way they hold water in an almost sponge-like way down deep below the surface level, as well as being able to provide nutrients. A little bit high pH, as clay soils have, which is also helpful for the vines to retain their acidity, and the grape actually ending up with a little more crispness than you might expect from a warm region. The sandy loam soils are beneficial in their mineral absorption and their drainability. That is, you want water to go through them and reach down to that calcite rock and create a natural, almost spring for the subroot vine development. Finally, the silica soils are very helpful with a different range of mineral content. and also reflecting and holding heat, very useful in the early going and a growing season. However, lower pHs here mean that they're sometimes not the ideal place. So they're usually best where it's mixed in to an overall calcareous soil. Now this is a beautiful rendition of a fantastic vineyard on a hillside with double rows up the steps of this hill, showing fantastic setting of vines above those gray-white calcareous rocks into which the vines are growing and developing, we hope, a beautiful wine down the line. It shows a really nice range of style of soil and vine placement. This is another whole look. This is a dry farm vineyard. As I said, there's only a few of them, some old vine Zinfandel and some Rhone varieties. This is an old Grenache vineyard. Again, you can see some of that calcareous soil mixed in with clay here, and quite a bit of flavor from these old bush vines or head-trained vines that can be very useful for many blends, and of course is a core variety for Rhone-style wines. Next, I wanted to show you calcareous rock and how it holds water. So the rock on the left is water-laden and weighs at least 50% more than the rock on the right, which of course is dry and shows more that chalky white look or yellowish look that we find throughout the calcareous portions of West Paso Robles. So that moisture stays intact throughout most of the growing season, and vineyards thrive on it by digging deep into those roots. And it's a fantastic advantage that Paso Robles has over most of the North Coast, the calcareous rock, which make it possible in a warmer zone to be successful with a wide range of varieties. And we go back to the coast for a little quick postcard shot of Morro Bay and Morro Rock, and the beginnings of what we would call this sort of classic pattern of moisture and cool air flowing over the Santa Lucia range from the ocean. Happens every day and creates that interior range of temperature, water, mist, and wind that's quite beneficial in West Paso for grape growing. Now, our varieties are quite a huge range. I mentioned 64 different varieties earlier. We're not going to go through all of them today, but just know that Cabernet Sauvignon is the dominant variety of the region, and blended with Merlot and often Cabernet Franc, Malbec, and Petit Verdot. Well, there you have the Bordeaux mixture, so to speak, of great varieties and classic range for making some of the richest wines in California. But of course, we've also become known as a Rhone zone, the Syrah, Grenache, Mourvèdre, Counoise, multiple other varieties, including many white Rhone varieties, have been very successful at different spots in Paso Robles. So we know producers are growing 13 or 14 different Rhone varieties in the same property, and that's a very interesting kind of development, very much like Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Old vine Zinfandel is still around. It has diminished as a percentage of overall production, but Zinfandel, as kind of the heritage grape of the region, continues to thrive, and there are many very good ones, dry farmed quite often, and some with some newfangled management principles and very different kind of yield levels and style, ultimately. So Zin was early in the 19th century, one of the most planted varieties. And as you can see on this graph, a very small percentage, about 6% of overall acreage. Note too, aside from all these other minor varieties that are useful in blending, and once in a while a producer will feature on their own, whether they're Eastern European, Austrian, Northern Italian, what have you, these are being worked with by a lot of craft producers who are making less than 5,000 cases of wine a year. I hesitate to use the word, but that's really the approach. If you have a small vineyard and you're using shared space to make a wine, there are limits to how much you can do. So the style of wine coming from some of these small producers can be more energized, more distinctive, and more personal than from some of the large, better-known producers that have broad distribution. So if you get a chance to get out there, come visit them, because they're offering some wines at cellar door that may not be distributed at all. So, I hope you've enjoyed our little tour of Paso Robles. I hope you find, like I do, that it's cooler than you thought. And certainly with the number of microclimates, the different soil types, the different grape varieties, and the many approaches to making wine in classic and modern materials, We have an amazing range of product, and there's a lot to discover in Paso Robles. So I hope you'll join me in a tasting to find out. Cheers, everyone. Hello again, and welcome, New York tasters. This is Joe Spellman, Master Sommelier with Justin Vineyards, speaking on behalf of the Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance, ready to taste through some of Paso's most diverse and exciting wines. We have 6 beautiful wines to taste, different varieties, different blends, different approaches, but they're all 100% delicious. Let us start with our Castoro Cellars Falanghina. Now, as you can see, Falanghina here is blended with a little Albarino, rather unconventional from the kick here. And we have a fantastic aroma, a bit of honey, some straw, a lot of citrus fruit. Of course, this is a wine that's typically found in Campania that tends to give us a lot of perfume. It's grown in those volcanic hills in central coast of Italy. Well, here it's coming from the central coast of California. And it's really a beautiful aromatic white wine. Now, the acidity is really nice in it. It's got good crisp mid-palate, nice golden color, a little bit of nuttiness or almond character, and in the finish, wow. What a nice layering of flavor. Some of that light straw, almond oil, honey, really great length. It's a very generous wine. Now, keep in mind, Castoro, which has been operating in Paso Robles for decades, has quite a wide range of production. And this Falanghina is one of their smaller production wines. So only 425 cases of this wine were made. Fantastic expression of a variety you won't find in too many other places in California. Of course, it's a beautiful property with many different varieties grown. Fantastic range of classic Italian varieties and multiple other sources. As we point out, though, that little bit, 22% of Albarino helps with the acid balance and should be a really lovely food wine. I'd certainly love this as an aperitif with any number of shellfish, sautéed scallops, shrimp, even with some spice, and a beautiful wine for a lot of cow's milk cheeses. Our second wine is Via Creek Roussanne. Now, Roussanne, we know, is one of the great and rare varieties found in the Northern Rhone. This was grown in the Willow Creek district at the famous and respected James Berry Vineyard. Very small amount of this wine is grown and made. Note, it's a 2017, so there's a little development here, and you can see it in the color. Again, a little bit more golden. It's an organically grown wine under James Berry Vineyard, and fantastic range of aromas come out of Roussanne, particularly with some age on it. And wow, that one's just got even more sort of floral notes, a lot of honey. The wine is minimally oaked, about 50% new French oak for maturing the wine, so it doesn't have quite the heavy oily notes that we often associate with Roussanne. Beautiful aromatics, some florals, some great orchard fruit, pear, mealy apple, golden delicious apple, maybe a touch even of tropical fruit. It's really fun, really expressive. And of course, very little wine was made of this variety from this producer. Quite a rarity, really one of the most special white wines you'll ever find in Paso Robles. Rich, layered, juicy, long finishing, soft acidity, and also a brilliant wine with really luxury foods. So think sautéed quail and lobster with butter sauces and so forth. Beautiful vineyard. You can see one angle of it here along this roadside at a dip. south facing. And then finally, as we look at another angle of it, from far higher up, looking toward the mountains to the north, really one of the most spectacular sights in Paso Robles. Our third wine is a surprisingly elegant Barbera from Giornata. This is a very young wine, a 2019, very fresh. Giornata, been growing really wonderful fruit and making fantastic Italian variety wines in many cases. This wine sees very little oak, only neutral, older Slovenian and French oak. And again, a very small production wine, only about 600 cases were made. But this has very strong diurnal temperature shift every day, very clean style, very delicate, almost crimson color all the way to the edge, very youthful. Fruit is direct, clean, almost kind of gamay-like in terms of that fruit and intensity, a cranberry note, the raspberry, strawberry aromas, really fresh. As we put it in the palate, tart, clean, crisp entry, nice flavors, very direct flavors, not particularly powerful, modest in terms of alcohol, modest tannin, and very clean, juicy, again, fruit-driven finish. The property is beautiful and the style is fantastic. Next, we are going to pour the Booker Syrah. Now, this wine is really spectacular. Inky black, quite opaque, and a beautiful version of very powerful Syrah from very limited vineyard. Whole berry clusters are made are fermented, in the fermentation tank, biodynamically grown, nearly a 20-year-old vineyard now, pretty dense, pretty atypical for Paso to be as dense as they're showing 7x3 here. This spends 18 months in new oak. Syrah can handle oak, 65% new barrels, pretty rich, pretty flashy, and really dense and exciting wine. Beautiful black fruit, very inky, great pepper, great meatiness, and it's still developing. Even though it's 3 years old now, it's got a long way to go. Big wine, big flavor, beautiful setting. The Fracture Syrah in the Willow Creek Vineyard from Booker. And you can see the spectacular lay of the land there. On this hillside, beautiful undulations and fantastic place to grow any number of varieties, including the whole Rhone range. And this Syrah is a great example. Our next wine in the lineup is the J. Lohr Signature Cabernet Sauvignon. Now, J. Lohr is one of the most established and broadest in production in all of Paso Robles, but they also, the Lohr family, has been making fantastic wine here, again, for several decades. Cabernet blends. This one, a fascinating blend of classic Bordeaux varieties, including all the major Bordeaux varieties, and one really minor one called Saint-Macaire, which is still vestigial in Bordeaux. It's surprising to see 6% Saint-Macaire identified as the part of the blend here. Again, a fairly inky wine, showing, though, some development of color, really rich, throwing tears at the edge, full-bodied, everything done by hand to nurture this wine to be the grandest wine that Jerry Lohr and his great family can produce. This has smokiness, it has lots of new oak character, it has fantastic berry concentration, starting now as of 2016 to show a little development, some tiny bit of leatheriness in a really positive way though, nicely framed by the barrel, full extraction, big flavors. Layers beautifully on the palate. Now, I don't know if you can taste all 6 of those key varieties, but it certainly is well put together and a beautifully balanced wine, demanding some protein. Big red meat is the way to go. We'll look at one of the J. Lohr vineyards here. The, again, roll of these vines up and down this hillside, produce so much concentration. And then our sixth wine in this flight, I hope you'll enjoy, one of our great producers in Paso Robles, the Dow. And the Dow, Soul of a Lion, again, a Bordeaux blend of classic proportions using Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot. No Malbec or Saint-Macaire here, unfortunately. But this is, again, classically made from a whole different vineyard site. Dow, situated in Adelaida, close to 2,200 feet above sea level, and only about 15 miles from the ocean. Fantastic clay calcaire soils, and the Dow brothers have done a fantastic job elevating this great old property, reforming it, and making it one of the most beautiful visits you can have anywhere in all of Paso Robles. So big wine with classic 100% new French oak aging for 22 months. This is kind of the gold standard of great Bordeaux blends, along with a couple of others I can think of in Paso Robles. Certainly big, rich aromas. Again, more flashy black fruit, very open in the nose, a bit of even violet or rose in the nose. And that wine just surrounds the palate with big flavor. It's long, it's rich, it's unctuous, it has great weight, and has the potential to age for 20 to 25 years easily. And you can see with their vineyard, the Dow brothers have really sculpted this hillside into one of the great estates of Paso Robles. The old Hoffman Mountain Ranch, now made into a modern, brilliant luxury facility, Dow. So thanks for joining us.